bit of a highlight. It's a little bit lighter. You can definitely see a difference between there and there. So now we have our muzzle to do. So I'm back into my bleach sand again. And I'm coming along the outer edges. Doesn't matter if I get over top of my shadow that I had there. You see that I will want it to be highlighted on the top of there. And I'm going to take a little tiny bit, not a lot. Again, I'm with the bittersweet. And I'm just going to go along here. And we'll just dirty the outside edge. So again, I'm bleach sand, a little bit of bittersweet. We're not doing a half and half. It's not a complete double load. It's just to put a little of that outwards. See that little rough edge around the edge where I overlap? Because this is a little bit furry around here, but not anywhere near like the rest of his body where he's got all that long fur. His muzzle's more like a shaved muzzle. So you see as I'm coming in here, that dark that I dry brushed is still remaining a bit of a shadow look. Even though I get a little of the bleach sand on my brush over top of it. And I like to have my lunar blender, a little tiny 1/8 lunar blender handy, so that, see how I can come in and I can clean up any areas that I might like, or darken a few areas. But I can bring just a little bit of the black brown back into here. See how I have this flat here? So if you have a little brush, you're able to direct it and kind of clean up places that you want. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side that I did over here. But at this point right now, if you can notice, what's kind of missing a little bit would be some of the white, like we put in the middle here. So I'll take some warm white. I'm staying with the little 1/8 lunar blender because this is a smaller section. And I'm just going to come in here and just scratch in a little of this. I scrunched my brush on the palette. But do you see that compared to this side? This highlight really rounds it out nicely. There. And we're going to put some little tiny nostril marks and whatnot before we put in our whiskers and that. So all right, so that's, like I say, I'll do that part over there, and then we've got his fur done. I've double loaded my 5/8 or number 16 with thicket and laurel, and I'm going to start at the outside edge of the band of my hat and work my way to the middle, flip my brush over, so the laurel's outward, the thicket's out again and the laurel's inwards, and I'll work my way inwards to blend. I don't have to meet the middle, I'm just working for the outside to blend it inwards. For my scarf, I'm working with the same colors. And I'm going to start with the parts that are underneath. So I want my, oh, I've muffed that up somehow. Let's just start that again. Okay. So I'm blending on my palette. I'm having the dark, which is my laurel. Pardon me, here I am again, thicket. And I'll blend my way from the top downwards, keeping the light to the outside. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the big section. You always do this one first because it's underneath. And I'm going to blend along there, keeping it a little lighter up top here. So I'll just turn my brush so I'm able to drag some of that color through it. And where our scarf bends down at the bottom, we're going to have a dip in the scarf so that it's like a ripple, right? So I would blend, flip my brush over, so it's a back-to-back blend. Just work my way back and forth, blending upwards, just to get that little dent in the middle. And that's just our underneath blending of our scarf. Now I'm going to turn, throw everything on the floor, double load again. Need a fair bit of paint on your brush. And I'm going to start with the dark up underneath. And remember, we're going to pull a little bit of the raccoon's fur afterwards. I'll blend my way, and then I can choose, I'm just going to come from this side. I probably should be reloading. Yeah, I need more paint. So I'm just going to come from the bottom, dark down, light up, use the paint on the other side of the brush. Still keeping dark in there. And let's see, I'll blend that along the edge. Actually, I'm going to turn that. That's the thing about this technique, is that a lot of times I'll get some light on a brush corner that I didn't want it on and end up blending that into something. So we want to put a ripple in again, like we did coming up the tail. So I'll just come through with this. I still have enough paint on the brush. Blend along like so. You always want to have enough color that it just streaks into each other. I can come through with the chisel of the brush after and just, you see how it'll blend and it'll give me a little bit of a rippled look to it. There, that's not too shabby. And we're going to do a little bit more work on the scarf as well, so, but this is our base underneath. With our bittersweet and khaki tan mix, we're going to shade along the outer edges on our hat. We want to walk it in nice and far, and we can strengthen that up with dry brushing afterwards. Flip it over, same thing on this side. Nice and soft. Big key, nice and soft. Move down. Walk it in. You can use your mop to soften that. Now I'm going to turn my piece. I've dried it. There we go. Nice and soft. We're going to float along the bottom of our brim. And I'll float along the knitted trim on there as well. Nice and soft. Just strengthen up along the very top here. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to dry brush now. Of course, I've dried my piece. And I'm going to dry brush the center and outwards, bringing in a bit of a highlight. And this is with burlap. And now I'm going to go do the same up in the top. And that highlights our hat. Now I'm going to pick up a little tiny bit of bleach sand. I don't want pure bleach sand, so I'm going to take bleach sand with burlap, the two together. Stipple one and then pick up the other and stipple it in. And just nice and softly strengthen up the center of our dry brush highlight. I'm going to dry brush on our nose. This is going to give us the top highlight on our nose. Neutral gray. And then we want to show his little nostrils. So I'm not going to join these two. I'm going to put a highlight below and a little scratchy highlight here and here. So that separates, gives them those little tiny dark nostrils. I'm going to come and dry brush a little bit on his eyes. We're going to dry brush the center of his shoes. I should be using a bigger one here. And now I'm going to take, and we're going to use slate gray. Slate gray is going to be our highlight on this dry brush. And we do not want a ton, but it's across here just a little bit to give us, I might even go for a little stronger. So what I'm going to do is not have as much scuffed off this time. So there's a little more on my lunar blender. Little scratchy highlight again on his eyes, a little brighter. And then we're going to give him a little highlight on his boots. We're also going to scratch a little bit of this. Give him a sole on those boots, and that can be bright. There we go. A little more on that nose. That looks pretty good. I'm going to take my zero round with our khaki tan, and I'm going to, this is the khaki tan bittersweet mix, and I'm going to put a little, there we go, kind of elongated comma to add a bit of color to his eyes. I'm just going to use the same whatever's left type of thing. I just want a bit of a drag. I've used a chalk pencil to kind of sketch out his eyes around there earlier, so I'll be erasing that off of there. And I'm going to take, and I'm going to put a little highlight up here with my zero round and bleach sand, and I like to press and blot these after I do them. This one I'd like a little rounder, and I blot them so it kind of bleeds out a little bit. Give him a little bit more highlight. They always have that little sneaky look on them. I'm going to scratch a little and a little here. That's not too bad. I think he could use a little swipe on the top of the nose as well. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to use the same zero round, pick up neutral gray. I really want to thin it down, make it quite inky. And this is going to be, whoops, I've got it quite inky here. We're going to add these thin down neutral gray dots around the nose. These dots, again, I tend to like to use my finger and blot those down so they just kind of fade out. I really don't want those to stand out too much. We're going to put our whiskers on after we're finished with all our little fine fur. So in the meantime, the next thing we might want to do is dry brush our highlight in the, and I'm going to mix bleach sand with my laurel, and I'm going to use, let's see, there we go. I just pick up the one, pick up the other, pounce them together, scuff those off. And that's going to be our dry brush highlight in the middle of our scarf. Pick up a bit more of the color, scuff it off again on the palette. And I'll put a little of that. In the center of that. All right. Okay, so we're going to shade our mittens. So I'll start by, and I'm shading with black green. So I'm going to shade my cuff. On this mitten, I'm going to come down and shade all the way down next to the scarf. Walk it out. Nice and softly mop. And then I can shade along the rest of the outer edge of the bottom part of the mitten, because it won't interfere as I come along up to the cuff. And now the shade the rest of the bottom of this mitten. I'll let that dry and then I'll shade underneath the cuffs. I'm going to dry brush highlights with a laurel on the middle of the mittens. So that's the middle of the cuff and the middle of the mitten, and a little bit on that thumb. But look at how that just rounds those out. There we go. So there's his cute little mittens. With a mixture of black, green, and thicket, I'm going to shade my scarf. So I'm going to shade along my outer edges. Just along like so. Let that dry, and then I'll be shading up to separate on the scarf. I'm going to shade to strengthen up the edges of our hat with raw umber. So this is over the khaki tan on our hat. Nice and soft. Lean your brush to the water side of the brush as you try to walk it inwards. Lean into the water as you're coming inwards and lifting your brush. You're lifting the paint off of the board. And then I'm going to walk it in, leaning to the water part of my brush. I'm going to dry this, and then I will shade to strengthen up the bottom shading. The finishing touches that we want to put on our little guy, I'm using my grainer or my filbert rake or comb, thin down, and bleach sand. And I just want to add a few little wisps. And this one here on this side, I would pull back this way. We're going to pull a few of the little black brown ones as well inwards. But we like these thin, inky little wisps. Throughout here. And like I say, these ones, I'm pulling back this way, but I'm still going the direction that I should be. So it looks like these ones are coming from the eye section. If that makes sense to you. These ones I can come on here. Always go back, pick up some more. It's got to be thinned and inky. And if you get them too heavy, just smudge with your finger. I'm notorious for finger smudging our little built-in blender. And turn the piece so it's more comfortable for yourself to pull. It's always easier to pull towards yourself. You have a little more control with your brush, your liner, whichever it is you're working with. If you pull towards yourself, rather than trying to push away. Just a few wispies throughout here. I get to thin again. You can see how I'm barely getting any marks. So I got to pick up some more paint and water. Okay, so that's with my little bleach sand. And now I'm going to pick up a little bit of warm white and just make sure I don't have drip on my brush. And I'm just coming through the middle more and just having a few more highlights in the middle, just the little fine wispies. Okay, now we have to switch and go into our black brown mix. And again, has to be inky, has to be watery. I'm not looking to give tons of wispy hair hanging off of these, but just enough that it, see if I pull a few, I never stop and check to see if it's in the camera. We just want to have a few crazy little wispies off the end. Need that little bit more water to pull out over top of that stenciling. Anything that gives you texture is a little bit harder to work around. Few wispy hair that hang down over top of his scarf. Sometimes I'll turn my brush on the chisel so I'm able to direct a few finer little pieces. That's not too bad. We just try to exaggerate him out, give him those cute markings on his face. Might give a few coming out by his arm. Maybe a couple over by his butt. Over the tail. That's not too bad. I think he looks pretty good. So other than adding our whiskers, he looks like he could be coloring this fellow done. So let's see what we can do for whiskers. I want my warm white, thin down, nice and inky. And we're going to pull. And again, always keep going back and into that inky well. And we'll pull in those whiskers. I like to put some on one side. And then again, we talked about how it's easier to pull towards ourselves. We don't want them to all come from the same spot or end at the same spot. And it's nice to have the odd one crisscross across another. Okay, I think I could take a little more highlights on the nose. I think he looks like we can call him done. Alrighty, that sounds like a wrap.